So we'll have a discussion here for about, we have until 12:30. And yeah, my name is Anders Hultqvist and I work as a professor of composition here in this building. And so I'll try to, in some way, lead or moderate this discussion. And on the extended techniques. And I just wanted to start by reading some wordings that I've noted from you all, like tradition as material, challenge the instrument, electronic music, contamination, extended from what? What does the music want? Other traditions, extended instruments, tune out the flutist, artistic aesthetic fundamentals. And when listening and hearing you all play and discussing this, I get the feeling of sort of extended from what, really? I mean, what if we saw it the reversal, really, that so-called traditional playing or schooling is, I mean, listening and hearing you play, as I said, I mean, is one out of 100 or 1,000 ways of producing notes, tones, playing music. And so a polemic question might be, why are we still talking about extended techniques?
That's a very good question. Because why aren't we talking about music?
Yeah.
Because technique means nothing. You know, in and of itself, no technique has any intrinsic aesthetic or expressive value. They're all tools. Tools that can be used to create things of beauty and things of meaning, tools that can be used to destroy things of meaning. And so, you know, I mean, these endless discussions about the new techniques drive me up the wall because I want to hear about, you know, the new music. So it's a profound and excellent question.
Anybody else want to expand?
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I think techniques, it is, of course, talking about your tools, it's a musician could say, this is the techniques that I use, but I think it's even more, in my word, it has been very much the composer's word, that you use these techniques to do what I want. And that has been, I mean, that's fine, because I learned a lot from that, working with people who actually want to challenge my playing and say, if you can do this. If I say, no, I can't do that, it doesn't work, then I won't learn anything new. Of course, you try it, and then you try it again, and then you learn different techniques, I mean, that I think expanded the way I look at music and how the music sounds, of course. So, but it's just a tool. They're, of course, are only tools, and I don't use that word actually a lot. Extended techniques. I think modes of playing. I mean, no sound. That more describing perhaps the sounds that you want to, or if you, I would like to try my sound in this direction. You find a way, a tool or a technique. Yeah. I think though it's something you say. We're doing these thousands different ways of playing, or musicians, so interpreters or improvisers are doing their different ways of playing, and it's all normal. I think somehow the tradition or whatever, I look at it that like on that on it like that you always have if you look at at least on the Western art music tradition, I mean it develops. I mean you compose things, people play things, they make art, whatever, and then it gets institutionalized because it gets normal, whatever. It gets more and more established, and then there will always be, these different kind of antithesis.
Assuming life goes on, there will be growth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I mean that there will always be an attack on this kind of institutions and traditions that will challenge them, and then you develop further. But it will finally also always be a tradition, new tradition, like you said. Will this be? Yeah, of course. And then you will have to challenge it to have a kind of grow or whatever change or vivid living on. You have to challenge the tradition.
So maybe one could talk about extended traditions instead of extended techniques.
Yeah, I think concerning technique, Michelangelo has expressed it very well, that the sculpture is already within a stone block. Mm-hmm. So the artist's work is to remove all the crap that's in the way for the sculpture.
I think his exact words were, I strive to free the sculpture from the stone.
Exactly. And if you want to be a little serious or almost pretentious, perhaps you can say that, every human being is a unique artwork and sculpture, and we have our voice, we have our body that is unique, and maybe the technique of us as artists, whatever discipline we choose, is to remove and free the pure story within us, if you understand the metaphor. It's a way of freeing what is technique, which there's a danger within the institutions, and we talked about it a lot yesterday, especially perhaps towards an orchestra player, but I would say also in some jazz educations, that you have a so-called absolute technique. You're supposed to play this repertoire, then you need to have these skills. Mm-hmm. And so the question might be if the institution is an education towards a profession or an education towards being an artist. That's kind of two different perspectives of playing music.
Rina, do you have a comment?
I think I'm a little bit more polemic and skeptical, because as Brazilian, I experience the tradition, like the classical tradition, in such a different way. Because of course, being trained as a classical musician in Brazil, when you come to Europe, you discover suddenly you're not really classical, so you're already apart, and it's so I'm very concerned how technique and politics, especially micropolitics, are related, and how this sort of constructions and words we use, and how this body of standardized practice are traveling through the world, and also what kind of subjectivity does it travels with, and especially because in my thinking, I think music, it's still, compared to the other arts, so centered in a certain type of modern subjectivity that is really based on this specialized fragmentation, which we are like really in small boxes. And I think I remember like so much, like during my education, to have friends musicians which have so many practice, and when you show what to do, you are confined like in the smallest possible box I could imagine as an artist, and so for me it became very central to understand what does it mean, and how you can dribble it, and how you can understand also this as this continuity of the imperialist enterprise through the world as the dominant subjectivity. So For me, I don't have any answer, but through my practice, I'm really like, perhaps I don't know if I take it, but the idea of freeing, like, or being, like, or finding ways, for me it's so much more complex, because being a colonized country, I understand how these traditions also travels and how they can be continuously like a form of oppression and like continuously being a form of reproducing certain practice. So, but of course it's just to throw a little bit of.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to maybe pose another question which goes back to the instrument and the tradition, and like when you talked about electronic music and the inspiration, and I mean a lot of composers in the 20th century got a lot of inspiration from electronic music. I know Penderecki, he said once that somebody asking how did the Polish school come up in the 60s, and he said, well, you know, we had this studio in Warsaw and strange sounds came out and we wrote them on paper. And then it became sort of a revolutionary Polish school, but really it was a sound that came out on the loudspeakers that were, and then they sort of needed new techniques, where you might say, to mimic that. But I mean, there is an interest. I mean, if it was only sounds we were after, then maybe we would all go into electronics, because then you can make everything there, at least theoretically. No, but let me finish it, because I think there's a real value in the performativity, sort of striving, playing with and against an instrument, and with and against in a tradition. So I would like you to say something about that sort of element in your own artistry.
Well, one thing I've noticed as the decades have passed, and you know, I'm in a different part of the life cycle than you are, is that these concerns about institutions become less and less and less and less important. The institution is much less important than this discussion would seem to have it. And you know, as one is just following the music you hear, picking it apart and analyzing it in an academic way, falls away, because it actually isn't important. And so, you know, I never think about the flute tradition, except when I have to give lectures to institutionalized flutists. But when I'm making my own music, that's never in my mind at all. That was not true 40 years ago, but it's true now. So you know, so I think it all depends where you're centering your perspective, of course. But if you're centering your perspective on the art you're trying to make, then institutions are become part of the landscape that you might have to deal with, but are not central to the nature of the art itself.
No, of course not. But they are very rich and very dominant in musical life. But that's another question. It doesn't have to do with the music.
Some of us have spent our musical lives outside of institutions, like me. And so there's been no institution that's been dominant in my musical life. And many others.
Of course, but I do. Well, we can forget the institutions, because it's only a symbol for, I think, for tradition and petrified whatever, not development, non-development, and it's not. I mean, it's not, it is the enemy somehow for music, but perhaps not for us personally. Though when you talk about the instrument, why the instrument and not, of course, I mean that's, I mean this all these thousands and millions of nuances that you can get out of these instruments. I mean, with the human interaction, it's, I mean, it's completely without limits. I mean, I think of course you can say the electronics is the same kind of tool. You can work with it. You can, but I do think this kind of very close relation between the instrument and the person and the physicality, the how you perceive these sounds close to you and the eyes. You cannot ever replace that with electronics. It's simply another thing, and so it's. I don't think it's.
But I mean, talking about tradition, it was like 20, 30 years ago, there was this notion that I mean, symphony orchestra would cease to be because now we can make a sort of a virtual orchestra with the electronic, etc. Yeah, but of course there are institutional reasons for why they don't sort of cease to be, but there's also, I think, musical in the way that, as you say, the performativity between the instrument and the person is really central here, and that's why that sort of modern, extreme modernist thinking maybe has not really come about.
Well, at its best, an organization like an orchestra, has this incredible humanity of so many people playing in concert, literally in concert, but in concert with each other to create music. Now, in certain areas of music, it has happened. A lot of the orchestras that one hears in films are actually synthetic, and an awful lot of very real-sounding orchestral music on television isn't real either, and it's spooky sometimes, just how real it sounds. But the instruments don't make music; people make music, and can't put people on a sampling keyboard.
That's of course very true, and I interpret your question, Anders, that although this is of course the fact, human people make music, I feel personally that my relation to the instrument is important. Sometimes I get the question from colleagues and students. They wonder how I still can motivate myself to practice, since I've been working for many, many years. And when reflecting over this fact, I realized that I'm not practicing because I want to get better. That's only a good side effect. I spend time with my instrument because I like spending time with my instrument. And the next step of this could be also, as a wind player, I need to breathe in a proper way to make the sound I want to have, and I focus on something that is outside my thoughts, outside my ego, the sound. So that's the core of all meditative and meditation practices. Follow your breath and focus on something outside. And aha, I thought, and then I discovered, of course, that the Japanese sect did this in the 1000th century, so what's new? It's called Sui-Zen, it means blowing Zen, which is very interesting because it kind of, I don't know how you express it in English, polletten trillar ner. something that I experienced from my practice, sitting with my instrument, focusing on the music. I want to play the sound, still challenging me, of course. Got an answer in why I like that so much. So that's a little reflection on relation to the instrument, which is after many years become so intuitive. So it's hard to notice the distance in, at least it's also an aim to make it follow your musical intentions. And the funny thing is, when it doesn't, it becomes even more fun. Because then you get a surprising impulse to do something you weren't ready for.
Sorry.
No, please.
I just would like to add, perhaps like I'll keep giving this perspective across ocean, but for me, institutions, they are still so important, like high music institutions of higher musical education, because I think like how it travels, like I don't think like if you are in the, like say, the dominant parts, if you, because in Brazil, the only way you have like public music education is at the university level, which we have for a very long time. Like, so music moved to university much earlier than in Europe because it stayed within the conservatories. But we have only one bachelor, and it's completely dominated by classical music. You can't do a bachelor. Now there are, perhaps 5 years ago, you start to have some, very few, I think there are 3, which have popular music, Brazilian music. And if you think we are a country, we have so many thousands of kind of traditions within a country. So every flutist, my generation, still graduates with the Jacques Ibert concert. So I'm very interested in, because for me the tradition is still there, but like what I love the most about the flute, and for me, because I say I'm a burden to the flute, and what I love about music, and I'm still a musician and I really love like this about music, is that the history of the subjectivity, it's built within an instrument. So you can actually, like the flute, it's a marvelous place to be because you see all the process of standardizing the scale, the chromatism, how you build, so it's all there in matter, and then it gives such a resistance to kind of see how you shape those bodies, how you standardize those practices, and what you can do from it. So I keep with the flute, and of course now I'm doing lots of what you call like post. I think we all do post-instrumental practice, where you whatever play balloon or objects or just. But I like my point to because you could just it's a European, Western European. Why you keep with it? I keep because I love this memory that's through years and years stayed in this instrument that helps a lot to understand what does it mean. And so for me, it's just as musician, sometimes I don't know if we understand the potential of this history, the memory in those instruments, to be able to see what happens through history and how those things can be changed or like made aware. So
you have to relate to it in any way.
Yes. And I really love it. That's why I love the flute. I really love to mess it with it.
I understand.
Yeah, there was really in the line sort of a question I had. One more here for you before we let the auditory in here. And that was really within music and tradition as a material, really, and how that it seems to be so important, the personalized tradition as material, and it's very sort of a subjective position. I mean, especially if we sort of compare to fine arts that has sort of had this kind of separation in the 60s and 70s, and by now is sort of, call it totally conceptualized in a way. But could you say something about this tradition as material?
hard because I mean.
I thought about you, Anna.
Yeah.
I mean, using the chaconne and sort of making layers upon it.
Yeah, but it's well, you also. I mean, when you talk about the flute, and also we talk about the musical tradition or whatever. I think the musical material is a better word. I mean, because tradition will put you in a line that you have to. But that there is a historical or something in the instrument and in the music that is already there. It was not the flute.
Oh, I thought it was the violin.
No, that would be really bad.
No,
But-
no, that sound too.
That's a new sound, yeah, I've heard before. But no, I just think that you said 40 years changed. You get out of the institutions. I think that we do live in a time where you talk about subjectivity, because I think that now we live in a time of the performer more than of the creator. Like, let's say, the big creator of the big work with the big W. That there is another way of looking at creation. I mean, it could be co-creation, working with others, or it's more of I mean, like the improvisation has really grown into something that has completely its own environment and its own history now. And so I do think that in my world, which was very much in dialogue with composers, where I was kind of receiving something, I now would say that it's completely different. It is. We worked now a few months ago with a composer who is just, what are you doing? What can you do? What is? I mean, so the interpreter and the improviser, the performer, is now in a completely more another autonomous artist. And if you compare with visual art, I would say that there you have backed off so much from skills that the concept is all, and then you will have somebody else do it for you, or you will not anymore. That changes also with time. It also goes up and down. And we are not there. I mean, the performer is not going to just stop developing the skills, but just in different ways, I think. So it's not a clear picture, I would say. It's very, but I see this change with the perspective of my musical life, at least.
Do you have a?
Yeah. I actually don't think of myself as a flutist. I'm a creative artist. In sound, I use the flute. And when I've heard something that touches me or is interesting to me, I feel free to work with it. So, none of us live in a vacuum. Time did not start with any of our lives. And so, we grew up with music around us, and we are part of a larger stream. So, I know every once in a while somebody's got to feel like I'm the total revolutionary. I will do everything different. I will not repeat a single note that anyone has ever played. And even if they wind up just in silence, that's not original either. So, so I think that the more we can dispense with labels, think of ourselves as musicians, not performers, composers, interpreters, all of that, the more free we'll be, and happier for it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you speak well. I associate, and I associate to that it's also, I don't know if it's really an answer to your question, but as I told you from the stage, I basically played improvised what you call rhythmic music, language called jazz or something like that. And playing the flute, kind of paradox itself, because the tradition of the flute within jazz is very obscure and not so important. So the saxophone, tenor saxophone, is like the iconic wind instrument, or the trumpet for that sake. Also the fact, when I was in my around 30, I had my first identity crisis out of many. I also realized that all my role models were Black Americans. Jimi Hendrix, Russian Roland Kirk, Stevie Wonder, John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins. And who am I, academic kid from Uppsala in Sweden, wherever Sweden could be? Like Trump said, I love Sweden. Sweden's great. No, but you understand, I was thinking, who am I to play their music? And that was in the process of what I told you about the Indian experience about identity. So I've been reflecting quite much about musical identity, what is my language, etc. Of course, I'm not narrowing down myself due to that, but as you say, Marina, I have to relate to something, and it's only recent 10 years that I accept to say that, okay, my musical language is jazz, or jazz tradition, but my dialect is very Swedish, with a hint of Indian also. So, you know, and that makes us all individual, but for me it has been a valuable and healing process to accept my language and also see the specifics of the tradition, to be able to problematize them and do another way. I don't know if it makes any sense, but
Yeah,
I'm finished.
great. Okay.
But is in conservatory or these institutions, you don't teach musicians to be artists. You teach them to be professional musicians. And that is a problem. You don't look at yourself as a musician, as an artist. You do music, or you have skills.
Yeah.
That is something I really often think of and try to discuss with the students.
Exactly, and I was
How do you
just
look at yourself?
going to say that, I mean, the four of you sort of, beside extending techniques, I mean, you have extended the field of yourself as musicians. You become improvisers, composers, etc. And that is very sort of, maybe that is needed for the musician to become a musician, to really extend the feeling of your own field.
Back in the 18th century, Quantz defined a musician as a good performer, a good composer, and a good improviser. And that, I think, is a very excellent working definition. The separation of these things is a 19th century idea. And the 19th century was a temporal cannibal. It ate most of the 20th century, and it's time not to let it eat the 21st. And so we need to, you know, as Anders said so well, heal ourselves, because we were ripped apart because of practical and aesthetic issues that were significant almost 2 centuries ago, but are not significant anymore, and in fact reduce us. You know,
But there are significant now. I mean, you're living proof of that.
Yeah, well, because we've consciously made that effort. You know, I chose to go to music school as a composer, not as a flutist. I do not have a degree in flute playing. So it also freed me from a lot of these pressures to be just skilled labor and prepared for the next audition and all of that. But what Anna has said is so true that so often it's kind of the last thing that gets talked about is music. You know, not the first.
Yeah. Thank you. We have 7 minutes, so there are room for questions that you have pondered on now.
I have something.
Please.
As we are the audience here, and a friend of mine in Gothenburg, he said that when he goes to our concerts, contemporary music concerts, improvisation concerts, he was sitting there and he found himself that his mind was flowing away. He parted from the situation where he was listening to music, and he found himself going away in his own thoughts. And after a while, when he did that many times, he wanted to follow himself. Where am I going when I go away? And he found himself going to his own creativity, doing his own work. And I think it's a good. You said yesterday on the concert that you have to be outside yourself. It's not a good thing to think of yourself. You have to think outside.
Well, it's not outside yourself. You have to be inside yourself, but not be thinking about yourself.
Yeah, right.
Just be really following the music.
Yeah, and I think his traveling in this, I think that's a good way of saying that it's art. It's not music. What is music? What is it? What is it we are talking about? You said that the fine arts has already in the 60s moved away from skills and everything, and we have not so long experience of that in music, but maybe we are closing to this field that we have together.
Well, I think we've all had that experience of listening or being in the presence of art, and it stimulates our own creativity. So it sounds to me like that was a successful performance and a successful perception, and that art did what it was supposed to do.
A little comment. One of my best musical friends that I play with a lot, when he goes to concerts, and it's really, really good, when he really appreciates it, he falls asleep. And so I always know when I see him in the audience, when he sleeps, I'm happy. And he says it openly, yeah. Then I can relax and I can just take it.
You fall asleep.
Yeah. Don't get worried.
Yeah, Ali.
I was thinking about, you've talked somewhat about tradition and the institutions, but if one thinks about, and then you've touched, some of you, about, like Anders and Marina, about culture, and I'm thinking one thing is to be aware of the institution, but when you're lodged in a life world, you become kind of blind to your own life world. I think it's very hard to see the limits of your own life world. And I'm wondering, you've been talking about, kind of polemically, it sounds like it's kind of easy to challenge things and transform. So I'm thinking, like, how easy is it actually to see the limits of your own life world and the normativity that you are lodged within, and how difficult is it to challenge it? Because so far I've heard how you all are, or many of you, quite good at challenging it, but what are the struggles? In both seeing the normativity and transgressing or expanding.
We have to go to psychotherapy for decades.
No, but I think it's something else. I mean, I think that art or whatever, when we are serious about what we do, and we really, of course, you could say we are simply within our environment and within music or within art or within white society, within Europe, within the tradition, but I do believe in the kind of potential of art or the way we communicate our thoughts and our visions, ideas, creations, that has an enormous potential of actually also transgression. What do you call it? Transgression. Yeah. I wanted to say transgress, but it doesn't work. But to really, I mean, to cross these borders because of a potential kind of, and also understanding, because there's a non-verbal understanding, and well, it's a very big issue though, because of course we live in little ivory towers, all of us. We are the 3% of the world that owns everything. I mean, so we have such privileges anyway in our society. But well.
Well, we can talk for a minute about the challenges that come up in the act of creation. It's not always easy. Every once in a while, music just comes, and one should be humble and grateful when that experience happens. But sometimes you really take yourself to the wall, and it can be incredibly painful to just not know where to go next in this piece, or not know what actually the piece is really, where it's finally going to go. And I know many times in composing, I know at the end I'll be glad I did it, but while it's happening, I sometimes wonder, why am I doing this to myself? You know, and whenever I meet somebody who goes, "Oh, I had so much fun writing that piece," I go, "You did?" I'll bet you I don't want to listen to it. It's going to be trite, because you haven't really challenged yourself. And so, you know, it's not, I mean, I can only speak from my experience as a composer, but it's not out of like, I know who I am and what I'm going to do at all. I mean, it's an endless search. And once and again you find something surprising and wonderful, which is great, but sometimes it's an awful lot of hard work, and days can go by where at the end, you know, I think, well, okay, I worked really hard today, and I hope somewhere in the unconscious there's something from this that will come out, because it didn't happen today.
I think, like, I also believe so strongly in the potential of art, but I also, like, I think especially in this project, Soprolus, like, this whole idea of, like, this obfuscation has to do what you said, like this, and I think somehow we are all in this period of a crisis of subjectivity, whatever you call it. So try to understand how your place and your role as an artist within the dominant system, it's a struggle. And I think also, like, the daily, I mean, of course, perhaps I hope we didn't pass the image that what we are doing is easy, because I think when we play, like, playing an instrument is such a struggle in itself. I can see in all the presentations how you always constantly putting yourself in a kind of very struggle position. But I agree with you that it's the main task is to, for me, and I think it's the only way right now I found is to work with these co-creations. That's why I'm working. So I'm trying to really to let myself somehow, and I'm not sure how much I managed to, but it's somehow to enter, and it takes very long time. And I've been doing this for 3 years, and to let someone really contaminate my body with another kind of practice. And this is the kind of closest, like for me, the most, like, profound way I've been able to just find a small deviation of this image, of this, what I call the flute is sovereign. So, and sometimes when I have it, it's also for this, to try to understand who you are, but I think it's this blindness and seen and blind, it's a constant, you're never totally blind and you're never totally seen, so I think that's why we create, because it's a kind of way to try to talk about it, but I think it's always like a struggle. I mean, I hope it is. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have some last question, maybe?
Yeah, it's maybe not a question, but a big discussion. But I think we all agree on it, that we struggle, we try to be creative, and it's all for the audience. It's all the one who received it. And I think that's the most important. And my question is, when you're really we're talking about extended techniques, and we can call it that now because it's easier. How do you experience your audience if they are musicians from an institution? Is that hard to play for them? Is it easier to play for whatever audience?
Children.
You don't, yeah. You don't know where they come from. You understand my question? I'm not.
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And you feel when you play, you feel the people, and that's whom you are communicating with, and somehow you just feel. You think about
so
Yeah.
I think
where they come from.
Yeah. The most scary place to perform is here, because I'm a teacher here. I say so much.
It's even worse for the students.
Oh, thank you.
No, I mean they are more scared than you are.
Okay. No, but as a performer, I think something we don't speak so much about, but it's also the nervosity and stage anxiety, and that everyone has experienced sometime. And of course, you can be affected of expectations that you put upon yourself with this important journalist sitting there or the record company sitting there. But this is something you have to mentally work with to be able to go into the music and what the music needs. And that is, you can work with this in different ways, which I try to do with my students also. But that's when I'm disappointed at myself after a performance, is when I try to do a show-off, do something that wasn't grounded in the performance. And I try to avoid that the most, and try to remain silent if I get the impulse to play something hip without it should be there. So it's, I understand your question, and it's an interesting topic about to perform, I would say.
I just think a relation with the audience, or as a performer, if you're a musician, you want to, if you have a problem with standing in front of the audience because of nerves. I mean, I think I used to talk to the students when I was teaching that you can never decide how the people who are out there are going to listen to you. I mean, they have nothing to do with that. But you can decide how you yourself listen to others. And if you listen with an open mind and with a kind of put yourself in a good relation to listening, then you can survive better if you have, because you cannot decide.
Just shortly, also like one so important thing for me, it's also been trying to experiment with what it means to be playing and what it means to be an audience. Because honestly, like, I love to play the instrument and to share, but like the construction of the concert situation is something I think awful for both, like, because it's like, there is not one time I come to present that I'm like, do I have something to give? It's like this, why am I doing this? It's such an awkward situation somehow, I think. And also with all the capitalist thing about buying and consuming it, so it's a long discussion. But for me, how I try to understand what does it mean, it's by playing in different places, shaping the spaces, experimenting with like both, sometimes playing very traditional concert situations, then you have like, you construct an installation where the audience will play together, or sometimes you mixed conversations or workshops. So I've been really trying to put myself in these different situations and also try to move how you were, to not have a chair at all. Sometimes, like, what happens if people cannot? So these kind of small things, just more to try to understand what it means. But I think it's a central question. It's so important to think how of this relation of who
This too.
perform. And
This too, we are here.
yes, also.
You are there.
You are.
Yeah. And for me, it has a lot to do with presence in the moment, to embrace the moment as an artist, and also as I'm improvising, to not get tempted to do the tricks I know that works, but to embrace the moment, whatever that moment could be. And you can practice this, of course. And that's the biggest challenge of being a performer, I would say, to be sincere to your experience of the presence moment. Yes.
Good. Let's that be the last word. Thank you, the panel.
Yeah, or it was a short comment.
Okay.
Just
one last.
I think this, about the concert situation, that it's so interesting. Again, talking about tradition and what we are used to, and also how, even though you are experimenting within a new field, and you're doing it on a stage, it will be communicated in a certain way, because the stage situation is so connotated with the traditional values or stuff like that. So I think it's a very, very interesting, just an interesting discussion, and something to be aware about when talking about tradition.
Yeah. Good comment. Well, okay, the last one.
Yes, I was just thinking about the institutions and educating just musicians and not artists, because it's so different nowadays. When we have internet, we can have the institutions like they are, preserving tradition, because we have this immense field of input. Every day when I look at the internet, I see inventions in every category of life. And I think this is amazing. So I'm very happy, looking forward, what's going to happen with music and artistry.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, the panel. Thank you for coming.
From the stage.